Good afternoon, everybody. Just give us a couple of minutes while we let everybody join, and we'll be starting in with you very shortly. Great to have you with us here this afternoon as we adjust all of our bits and pieces and get ready for an hour and a half together. Looking forward to it. Great. So I think in the interest of time, for all of those of you who joined today on a very timely basis, let me kick it off. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to a discussion being hosted by Stewardship Asia and Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, as we're known. Sustainability and stewardship sit comfortably together at the same table. The foundations have some commonality, and the key to the success of both is moving the talk or intent to action and impact. We wanted to convene a group of leaders today who will individually and collectively inspire and energize others to question the status quo in pursuit of a better future. Collectively, every person in this session today has the ability to fuel the acceleration needed to change our mindsets, our systems, and our actions. And as I started today's session, I wanted to share a quote that I thought might encourage our thinking, and it's this: have we built a society that knows the price of everything, but the value of nothing? Borrowing that from Oscar Wilde. Our session today promises to be lively and a little dynamic, I hope, as we build on each other's perspectives. We will seek to be addressing the challenges of today and tomorrow, and what are our roles and responsibilities. Also accelerating sustainability-led transformation, as well as the urgent call to steward leadership. And then we'd like to open the floor to you and hear your perspectives and questions. Given the virtual nature of the session today, we ask for your active engagement, knowing that different perspectives will help us consider where we stand on the change continuum and how we can affect the outcome. Because in summary, enough for all, forever, is not our current trajectory. My name is Michelle Lemons, and I lead the Regional ASEAN Hub for GRI here in Singapore. GRI is an independent international organization that provides a global common language for corporate transparency. We help businesses understand and communicate their sustainability impacts, and our standards are the world's most widely adopted and used sustainability reporting framework, and is freely available. Personally, I'm from a business transformation background with M&A, strategic alliances, startups, JV experience from across Middle East, UK, and APAC. But I made a change about 2 years ago to champion sustainability because I believe we fundamentally need to reconsider the way we produce and consume. And to tackle this, we need a different set of skills and backgrounds. So let us take a moment as we start our session to introduce 4 leaders from the region, 3 leaders from the region, let me rephrase, who all bring a wealth of experience and depth of diversity. Mikkel Larsen from DBS, Ilaria Chan from Grab, and Rajiv Peshwaria, the CEO of Stewardship Asia. If I could ask each of you for a few brief words to introduce yourselves today, starting with Mikkel.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Mikkel Larsen. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for DBS. In case you don't know what DBS is, we are one of the largest banks in Southeast Asia. I'm also a horrible tree hugger personally, and will do pretty much everything to save nature, but we'll leave that for another day.
Thanks, Mikkel. Ilaria, if I could pass the baton.
Hard to follow that. Hi, my name is Ilaria. I'm currently the group advisor for Grab. For people who don't know Grab, we are Southeast Asia's largest technology company. We are a super app model, which we have multiple services from ride-hailing, delivery, fintech, telemedicine, to last mile logistics. Before that, my previous career was with Goldman Sachs. Aside from serving as an advisor to Grab, I'm also a global speaker. I do private investments as well as serve on the board of trustees for humanitarian organizations, Care for Children and Emancipation. I also spend time advising Global San Francisco's Women Empowerment Initiative. Great to see you all today.
Thanks, Ilaria. And Rajiv, across to you.
Thank you. And my name is Rajiv, as Michelle mentioned, with Stewardship Asia. We champion the fact that, shareholders need to rise above themselves and take care of a broader and over 2 decades in various roles in the corporate sector in companies like American Express, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Coca-Cola. And over a decade ago, I decided to move to the nonprofit world. And for the last 25 odd years, I've been trying to study and understand human behavior. One day I shall. But on that point, Michelle, thank you for your opening remarks. But I've been dying to ask you this. So, and Mikhail actually alluded to this. Many still believe that sustainability is for compliance, CSR, and tree huggers, and not for real business. My job is to deliver the next quarter, is to make money, not to be some kind of an environmental activist, as they say. So, Michelle, let's start with why business should care about sustainability. So if I can put you on the spot, you have exactly 3 minutes and your time starts now.
Well, thanks very much, Rajiv. You're putting me in a pretty challenging task to capture the essence of why sustainability matters in only a few minutes. But let me take a crack at it. Many of you today fall into what we might call the converted. You see the path to sustainability as not only a pressing need, but perhaps even the holy grail for the survival of humanity. The science convinced some of you. Climate change is a real risk today and tomorrow, and living in a 4-degree warmer world isn't about turning up the AC a few notches. For others, the logic of our economics models have been questioned, as we recognize that making as much money as possible at almost any cost is not the answer. And then others are being influenced by different facts. An extra 2 billion people on the planet by 2050, when we already have around 700,000 under the poverty line. Global species decline of 68% in the last 50 years, or a third of all food produced for our consumption getting lost or wasted, and 1.8 billion people living in countries or regions with absolute water scarcity in the next 5 years. Yet others have reflected on the overconsumption, landfill overflows, and a wasteful mentality that we've really learned in recent years. Some might say a life cycle and a lifestyle that's out of control. And then again, maybe, just maybe, some of you have been influenced by your kids as they question the how and why of what we're doing to their Mother Earth and their inheritance. But in case you still need to convince you, the line that sometimes does it is, there's no business to be done on a dead planet. And yet, despite all this, our pace is slow, the alignment of our business strategy often remains weak, and action sometimes belongs to somebody else. But let's take a look at the other side of that sustainability coin. One where 2 months ago, Energy Transition Committee estimated an extra $1 to $2 trillion of spend per annum would be required to get us to net zero by mid-century. That's along with the trillions for the SDGs and the money that's required to that success. But also on the other side of this coin, we see businesses rethinking, reinventing themselves, where as a service models start to move us from ownership through to better resource utilization. Transparency among our supply chain and in our ESG disclosures build a trust with partners and consumers that are around partnerships rather than transactions. The circular economy is becoming more commonplace, or at least attractive, and waste becomes inputs or indeed a revenue stream. Innovation and digital enables us to run our businesses in ways that we haven't thought of, and capital is moving. It's being allocated to more resilient businesses with a longer term view. And so doing well by doing good is not only okay, it's actually the key to our future success. There are leaders and laggards. There'll be winners and losers, but in the pursuit of sustainable development, we are faced a unique choice. and that is to harness the exceptional ability that we have to invent and solve the trickiest problems for our planet and people. The legacy we will leave behind is being forecast in part by the leaders in this discussion today. So I hope I got in within 3 minutes, Rajiv. Pretty close, I hope.
You did well.
And so look, I'm going to turn this to you. Let's talk about leadership. Stewardship's a bit of a fashionable word at the moment, if I try to be a little direct. And I'm not sure how many people are in the audience really understand what it is. So let me put you on the spot. And can you clearly and simply and concisely define what it is?
Look, I just said 3 minutes, and you've put 3 conditions on me: simply, clearly, precisely. Anything else, maybe? Thank you. But I thought you would do that, so I came prepared. So let me actually share my screen here for a second and take some help with all with the big responsibility you put on my shoulder. So what is stewardship? You're right, there is a fair bit of confusion about it. So let's kill the confusion right up front. Stewardship is leading, managing, governing, and investing responsibly with the purpose of sustaining long-term value creation. So every business wants to create value over the long term. And what stewardship says is, in today's open world, the only way to do that, to sustain your own long-term value creation, the only way to do that is to do that by balancing the needs of all stakeholders, not just shareholders, society, the environment, and future generations. So that's stewardship. It's an overarching mindset more than anything else that enables sustainability, that enables E, S, and G, that enables us looking after future generations, our employees, and everybody. So it's the prerequisite mindset, if you will, and for the organization, it's the culture that enables all of those things that we talk about. So does that make sense?
Sounds good. I know we'll be coming back to this quite a lot throughout the session today. So thanks for that, Rajiv. And so let me bring Ilaria and Mikhail into the conversation. You've heard both from Rajiv and I on the why of stewardship and sustainability. You might see things slightly differently. Both these terms mean different things to different people. And so I'd like to explore what they mean for you. What do these topics mean? Do they keep you awake at night? And if so, why? And also your organization. Ilaria, if I could go to you first, please.
Of course. And thank you so much. You guys have done such a great job exploring those terms. I don't know what to say. Why don't I try a slightly different angle? I think when I also look at the word sustainability and the word stewardship, and sustainability really have been almost overused these days. I would like to stretch it a little further than just this blanket statement, right? People feel like sustainability these days is doing good when you're doing business. Okay, what does it really mean? To me, and I think to a lot of the work I do, whether with Grab or on my own as an investor and with humanitarian organizations I'm on the boards of, I think of the word sustainability as flourishability. Beyond sustaining something, right? Sustaining something keeps it going, but we don't know whether it's just that bare subsistence minimum, or are people thriving, growing, and becoming better? And I actually love the word flourish. To me, sustainability is flourishability. Are you of use to people and growing people's livelihoods or whatever causes that you recognize as your own, so that they become bigger and they can be on their own feet and do well. And stewardship too, I really love looking at the old school dictionary, because in the old school Webster dictionary, stewardship is actually called and defined as managing, conducting, supervising, and responsible management of something entrusted to someone's care. It's an ethic that embodies the responsibility of planning and management of resources, which implies that it's not actually yours. You're not the owner if you're a steward. You are being entrusted with the resources at the chapter of your life to take good care of something. And I always think when I look at businesses in the word stewardship is, if I have a really expensive mansion full of really beautiful things and I'm leaving the country for a year, I need to hire a steward to look after my mansion and my expensive things for me. What kind of person would I hire? And that's actually how I look at CEOs that I work with or companies that I invest into, the founders, are they someone that I would entrust really expensive and valuable resources to, knowing that they will not only take good care of it, they will treat the employees and people involved well, but they will grow it and make it into something better, or will they abuse it and just spend it on their own? And I think upon that backdrop, what keeps me up at night is, I would just drop one quote. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the roles of elites, and I consider all of us as elites because we are living in the first world, have the luxury to talk about this because of the positions we're in. I read a book, controversial book by this author that wrote Winners Take All. And this, even though there's some things I don't agree with, there's one quote that I think really keeps me up at night. And it says, quote, "By refusing to risk its way of life, by rejecting the idea that the powerful might have to sacrifice for the common good, it clings to a set of social arrangements that allow it to monopolize progress and then give symbolic scraps to the forsaken, many of whom wouldn't need the scraps if the society were working right." Kind of a slap on the face for, I hope, for a lot of people, definitely myself, is, are we throwing scraps when we talk about sustainability, right? Are we just creating aesthetics? And I think that's something that I really look forward to discussing with all of you heavyweights today about what are we really doing? Are they aesthetics or are they substance? And can we really create change, you know, together to enable the dream of sustainability and flourishability to go on?
Thanks, Lara. That's some really good choice of words there. I haven't heard flourishability. I think that's a new one for me. I like it, and that quote we're coming back to. But I could talk for ages. Mikhail, to you.
Thank you. And I wasn't going to respond the way I did, but having just heard what Lara said, I feel like I need to add on to that. I also have a bit of a problem with the word sustainability. And if I were to be fully dramatic and controversial about it, I'd say it's a first world phrase, right? When we talk about these things. And that's why it becomes hollow in many cases. We don't really know what we're talking about when we talk about it. It's something about doing something good for society. Flourishability certainly is a lot better when you talk about it. But I also think if you just make it concrete, it's what's your position on, do you know, and what is your position on having child labor in your supply chain? That's something I can relate to. That answer is probably pretty obvious. But then if I go, you know, should everybody have a sustainable minimum wage? And what's the trade-off with that? Then they become concrete issues I have to deal with. Now, these are first world issues, but there's certainly also third world issues. And I think that the term sustainability suffers from this fact that it's trying to be a little bit of everything for everybody. So having said that, though, given that is a framework that we all understand, what it means to me is it's essentially three things. It starts with understanding the impact that you make. So whether you're a bank as we are, or whether you're producing sneakers or whatever it is you do, understanding the real impact that I have, positive and negative. What are all the externalities when I sum them up? Only when I know that can I then get to my second point, which is what trade-off am I willing to make as a company between the impact that I am making and the profit that I need to make. And that might sound very horrible when you put it like that, but that's reality, right? You know, every company in this world is somehow using natural capital in their process. And so what are the right balance that I find between creating social progress versus environmental degradation? What are the sensible trade-offs that I'm willing to make as a company? And that thereby the awareness is created and it forces some tough choices. And then the third bits come into the implementation. And this is what I guess most of the conversation will be on today. But you can do the first two bits, but if you don't know how to measure and get it into your organization through cultural changes, you'll never get that to happen. So for me, that's what it's all about. What keeps me up at night? Well, on a personal level, it is essentially the tragedy of the horizons. I think, and again, this is me being controversial, I think we are starting to get our hands around climate change. but because we are starting to realize just how impactful it will be for each one of us. And then as humankind, we start to react and we'll put the technology forward, the legislation forward, and I'm quite hopeful. Because I'm a tree.
We've just lost you, Mikhail. Can't hear.
Let's try again. Can you hear me now?
Great.
Okay.
Perfect.
I don't know what happened. Apologies. What I was getting to was, well, I think we can get our heads and hands around climate change. The similar big crisis of biodiversity and saving nature, I think, is a much bigger problem. Because I appreciate that the inherent value of nature is not something that we really appreciate as mankind. And so I think we got to get pretty far towards the cliff before we really start to take this serious. And that's a shame in many ways, not just financially, but also for us as a humankind. But it kind of borders into the philosophy, but you asked me what keeps me up at night, that's the one. But I'll stop here.
Thanks, Mikhail. Look, and I think you're absolutely on the button in so many of those things, including the fact that we're starting to get to the point of getting the engagement, and we're beyond awareness of climate change. But that next big mountain, if you like, is the biodiversity one. Rajiv, can I throw that back to you?
Sure. 2 years ago, a few friends of mine and I wrote a book in which we tried to answer this question. How has the world changed, or how is the world changing? And what do we need to do from a leadership, governance, and management perspective? So perhaps I'll share a few thoughts or a few leaves from that book. So again, allow me to share. Where did we go? Here we are. And share. So that was the definition of stewardship. But let's go back to understand where we are today and where we are going tomorrow. I'd like to take you to a small tour of history. Once upon a time, we all lived in small villages. This is before industrialization. And by the way, work from home, WFH, that started then, because we lived on the farm, we worked on the farm, or we lived in the hut and produced our artisanal stuff from the hut. So work from home is not a new phenomena. We all lived in villages. Everybody in our customers were the village. No, we knew nobody outside the village, but everybody knew us. So there was no distance between home and work. There was no distance between us and our customer, because everything we produced, we sold within the village. And work, life, and business were totally integrated and transparent, meaning everybody knew everybody. If you did something good, the whole village knew in a day. If you did something bad, the whole village knew in an hour. So in that sense, we were kind of naked, yeah, because our whole world was the village. Then comes the first industrial revolution, and those three trends start to reverse themselves. For the first time, given that we now have the railroad and the factories, we start seeing distance between home and work. People start commuting to work. For the first time, there's distance between us and the customer. We are producing here and selling there. And we are becoming invisible to the customer rather than being naked and totally transparent. These three things continue in the second industrial revolution. More distance between home and work, more distance between customer and producer, and less visibility. We are becoming more and more invisible, and that continues through to the third industrial revolution as well. Now we've become completely invisible to the customer. Nobody knows where the goods were produced or who produced them, and that's where we are. So clearly, the three trends of the village life have completely reversed themselves, yeah? And that brings us to the fourth industrial revolution, which is where we are today. But besides technology, life has fundamentally changed in some other ways as well. And what are those? Here they are. There is this clear rise of free agency. By some estimates, 40% of the US workforce is already a free agent. And this is not just a Silicon Valley trend, it's here in Asian countries as well. Second, ordinary people are more empowered than ever before, because today each one of us carries a weapon of mass destruction. I'm referring to the cell phone in our pockets. Why is that a weapon of mass destruction? I guess you already know that. Leaders and organizations, on the other hand, have become completely exposed. exposed in the extent of being naked again. And you can be found out within 2 clicks where anything was produced, who was behind it. You are 2 clicks away from being totally exposed and naked. And by the way, amazing opportunities and daunting challenges coexist. I want to talk a little bit about that last point. What do I mean by amazing? So today with a high-speed connection, anybody can start a business or can start a movement. So that's the amazing opportunity side of things. Let's take a look. They call this the Asian century, right? Because the growth is going to be from Asia. Exciting growth opportunities, just to give you a few examples. Let's look at poultry consumption. America consumes 9 billion birds a year, and Asia, with 13 times the people, collectively only consumes 16 billion birds a year. And it's true that as countries become more affluent, they consume more protein. So look at the opportunity for food companies when it comes to the opportunity here of the Asian century. Here's another one, same story with energy consumption. Long way to go before we catch up with the Western world. But here's one of my favorites, and it is this. Can anybody guess how many cars per 1,000 Americans, between 1,000 Americans, how many cars do they own? So with every 1,000 American people, between them, how many cars do they own? Does anybody want to take a guess? Michelle, Ilaria, anybody?
3,000.
Well, it's not as high as 3,000, but that's the kind of response I usually get. It's 800. Okay, what do you think that number is in China? It's 200. And what do you think that number is in India? It's 50. So can you see how automakers are salivating looking at the Asian century? Opportunity, opportunity, opportunity. And yes, car ownership is going down in the West, but for somebody who's never owned a car, it's still a dream. And here's another very interesting fun fact. India's luxury goods market, this is just India. India's luxury goods market is seen as 350 million consumers, more than the entire population of the United States. So that's what I mean when I say exciting opportunities, and anybody with an internet connection can start a business or a movement. But there is the other side as well, which is the daunting challenges. And all 3 of you alluded to some of these challenges, but let me just, even if it's repeating, go over them one more time. 6 out of 7.5 billion people today have mobile phones, but only 4.5 billion have access to a toilet. And most of these toiletless people are in Asia. You know what? If you gotta go, I'm sorry, there's no app for that. 780 million people do not have access to clean drinking water today. And I'm told that 1 in 2 hospital beds is occupied because of a waterborne disease. Asia's, and Michelle, you mentioned this, Asia's food and feed demand will double by 2050. Without major reforms and innovation in water, our food situation is going to be really, really bad. And finally, yes, connectivity creates new means of livelihood and progress, and life is much better today than it was a few decades ago. But that technology also created the dark net, which facilitates drug and human trafficking, child pornography, and many, many other ills. So that's really what's going on here. The point is, I said that we are there are changes that are taking place. Everybody's talking about the technology side. Everybody's talking about the business plan and the disruptive business model side. But what about these human changes? Point is, we are back in the village, naked, but the village is now global and it is under threat. That's really what's at stake here. So I hope I summarized that in the best possible way I could. But with that, the question I would like to raise to my fellow panelists here is, how can we accelerate? So Ilaria, Michelle, you all are, talking to you is like preaching to the choir, right? You are the converted. But why is this not catching fire, given that we have less than 10 years to go before we can secure the future of our children and our grandchildren? What can we do to accelerate the pace of focus, if you will, on stewardship and sustainability? Your thoughts, please.
So do you want to start, Larry?
Yes, please, Mikhail. Thank you.
Oh, no. I was offering someone else to start, but I can start. But I don't know if I had the answers to this, I'd be having a different role than the one I do. Not that I necessarily want that, but I think the reasons why it's not happening, I think pretty much everybody on this call probably already know. And it boils down to the tragedy of the commons and the tragedy of the horizons. It's a big problem, but it is not my problem. That's the tragedy of the commons, right? And the tragedy of horizon, it's a big problem, but it's not my problem today. And we'll fix it later on. And to be honest, I have a lot of sympathy for, so many people ask me, why don't you just become a B Corp tomorrow? So for those who don't know what a B Corp is, a B Corp essentially is a company who have essentially a broader set of responsibility to all the stakeholders. You can argue that all companies have this, but now it's by incorporations. And so essentially profit doesn't become your own means. Well, we also have to remember that, we like to think of other people's big money as the problem, right? But ask yourself, would I put my savings to this? And reality is that all money ultimately is citizens' money. So if I'm a CEO of a company, I'm managing someone else's money. And ultimately, those people who are investing in me are managing someone else's money, and ultimately it's my money. So it's not surprising that some of these trade-offs are really hard to make if you are the leader or board of an incumbent company. So what does it need to change? Well, there are many things that can change, right? But ultimately, you need to talk in the terms of financial capital. And you can then say, well, there's some other capital that will turn into financial capital. Absolutely agree. So what are some of the ways you could do this? We all know that if we could price all the externalities correctly, we would all change tomorrow, right? So if we could think of ways to do that, either by regulations or by mechanisms of voluntary, which is harder, for example, internal carbon prices, that's certainly one way to do this. But it boils down to four things. Why are companies doing sustainability? Generally, somebody told me once, you do it because if you don't believe that it's the right thing to do, you do it to increase revenue, to reduce cost, to reduce risk, or to improve reputations. So you got to be playing on one of those four parameters. And if it's not through regulations, then you've got to build a really strong business case for why it actually attracts those talent. We all kind of believe that, yes, it attracts talent. Now, my own personal argument, and I'll tell you that, is that this helps create innovation. And the more I've been in my role, the more I believe it. It's hard oftentimes to say that it will generate revenue in the future, or reduce cost, or regulation will be coming, or it's good to be a thought leader. But what I've seen time and time again, and if you try to get some of your people to solve some of these larger problems and do it in a profitable way, the inspiration that comes to these people is mind-blowing. So if I could only put one thing forward, is try and think in terms of, how does this help? How does solving some of these SDG help me become better at innovation? And certainly, no matter what industry you're in, I can only think of a couple where you don't need to, but all other industries need to innovate. That was a long answer to a short question.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned, those four different angles to come at it. Whichever one appeals to you, use it. It's not just about the goodness of your heart, right? There are many reasons why. Thank you, Mikhail. Ilaria, your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I think a big part of, the barriers that's holding back from, moving all this into action is actually very human, right? We are conditioned to look at immediate gratification, whereas a lot of these decisions require delayed gratification. We are, when we're not secure, we tend to protect our elitism or to protect our position, but actually to do the right thing to promote sustainability and stewardship, we actually need to share. We need to put ourselves into people's shoes. And especially, I would like to say, in Asia, where the past probably 2-3 generations is really about family wealth, family conglomerate wealth, family business, right? And what the patriarchs share it to the second and now probably the third generation. And asset inflation has gone crazy. Affordability of housing has really been stifling the working class, and a lot of governments don't do too much about it. So in many ways, I think that there is a status quo that also promotes what I just described. I would use a philosophical way to have a simple solution. I think if all the haves can put ourselves into the shoes of the have-nots, and think of and use our talents and gifts in business to try to just solve one pain point for the have-nots. I'm using broad terms here, and find a profitable way to do it, because frankly, when you solve a pain point well, that makes business sense, you will make money. One of the richest guys I met last year at a charity ball in the US, his family in Alabama is a waste collection, sewage collection company, because a lot of people don't want to do it, and they've developed a way to do it well. One of China's original richest women collected garbage paper and recycled and made it into a paper company. A lot of tech companies were born out of a need on social gaps that they have to solve. So I would really encourage those elements to all come together. And empathy is not just a fuzzy word. Empathy is powerful because it allows us to see the world and needs through another person, another demographic of person's angle. And thus, if we have creativity, we can create something that works for them, and that can really scale and grow, especially if we're looking at Southeast Asia, when we look at like 650 million people waiting to mobilize, waiting to move into middle class, waiting to have a healthy life. Not to mention Africa and all these other countries out there who are equally desperate to improve their livelihoods in the same way. Yeah.
So well said, because you reminded me of a quote that a friend of mine always says. He says, you have to be selfish to be a giver, because it's only when you give do you realize what it means to receive. So do it for your own self. So thank you there. Michelle, you've been looking at this from a regulatory and reporting point of view. What's your experience, and what can we do to accelerate?
Thanks, Rajiv. Look, I'm probably going to cut through and I'm going to go very directly to this. This is about us building some trust and transparency. And that goes all the way along from boards, down to CEOs, down to employees, down to customers, to suppliers and to partners. Because really the only way that we can get some of the change through that's required is to work together. Nobody has got this sorted out. The problems, as we've talked about today, whether it be some of the things that Mikhail talked about or Lara, the problems are just so massive. Our old way of working through things and competing as organizations in a box with everybody else won't help us get through this. And so, yeah, you could say level playing field is about driving regulatory outcome, or regulatory outcome is driving a more level playing field, and that will only increase. There is no doubt in certain areas. However, there's a lot more opportunity, and if we get time in Q&A later on, I'd like to come back to the innovation angle and the family office angle, because I think there's a really interesting interplay that's opening up for family offices around how do they enable and how do they impact in the way that they do their investments. And I think we're just at the beginning part of the curve there in particular. But for businesses, innovation and digital together is key to achieving some of the sustainability goals. So if I could take back the reins from you, Rajiv, is that okay from now?
All yours.
Wonderful. So I want to jump into accelerating sustainability-led transformation. So we talked about change, we talked about needing to act. And so I had a nice little intro, but I'm going to park it in the interests of time. As corporates, we're holding a lot on our shoulders and we need to get on with it. We need to adjust, we need to partner for change. And investment has moved this year. So Mikhail, we all know that when investors and customers' motivations change, investment dollars move. Is DBS feeling this push yet? And if so, how are they responding and transforming?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Now, we're fortunate to have a single large investor who's on this call, Temasek, who takes sustainability as seriously as I could ever hope anybody do. They're a true leader in this. And so what they do, and they don't just put pressure on us to live up to the targets that they set, but they also help guide obviously that's the best situation that you could be in. But even for other investors that you can have, I don't think that we're about, if you asked me 3 years ago, probably the mainstream investors into us, and institutional investors, many of them wouldn't have asked those questions. Today, it's hard to think of a single one of them who haven't had a specific line of questions for at least an hour that I've had to ask ESG questions. So we're certainly feeling it, absolutely feeling it. We're also feeling it from other stakeholders. So whether they be society represented by NGOs, our customers, our employees, we're feeling it from many fronts. And in many ways, it does help us nudge things forward. But it's obviously double impactful when it just doesn't come with a standard, you must do more, but also some thoughts around what is it that you want to see and why is this important to you as an investor or a lender or anybody else. And we're very fortunate that we've been able to have that conversation with our investors. Now, not everybody is in the fortunate situation that we are in having those types of investors. And I would argue that sometimes you need to go and look for it yourself. We've also come to realize, either when we help place bonds or shares with other people as a book builder, or when we speak to ourselves, that there's a whole community of investors out there who has a pot of money, which you may not need right now, but you may need them later on. And they will ask you those questions. So we've all heard the staggering numbers around how ESG investment is growing. But it's true that mainstream investors are either having to or choosing to incorporate them in there. So you might just want to start thinking about these things, engaging with them, and find out where are those pockets that you can actually tap on, and what does it take to get there. But just to summarize, I think having people looking at you, uncomfortable as it can be, certainly helps move the needle forwards. We all need that nudge. And of course, when you're in my position, you're in a slightly balanced, because it helps you in doing the job that you want to do. But on the other hand, you're also the face-off to the organization. But that's what makes the job fun.
Thanks, Mikhail. I wanted just to go back to one of the points that you made, or that I was looking for you to make, which is around customer. And maybe you can touch on that in terms of DBS, or maybe just more broadly about, there seems to be a bit of a rhetoric that people are saying, you know, once we can get customers voting with their wallet, we'll be in a much better position. And then on the other side, people say, you know what, customers, they need to pay more, they're not prepared to. So either in DBS Lite or just more generally, I'd be interested in how you see that fueling transformation.
So I apologize, Michelle, if I didn't fully understand the question, so I'll answer to the best of my ability. Looking at it with the DBS lens, we certainly have felt the fact that customers do want to change, but it doesn't cost them anything. So, for example, we launched a green deposit arrangement in Taiwan recently, and it's very clear from the intel that we got that, you know, don't try and move around the interest rate, right? That's got to stick, and then you have to do things on top of that, which is generally where it gets problematic. So then you have to do what we have done in this case, in many cases, you have to believe that this is the right thing to do, and you become, you know, you move from being leading edge and maybe to become a little bit of a bleeding edge, not just to build the brand awareness around yourself, but also because you believe that you want to be there when the clients come. In terms of people just have to pay more, I think that's not the notion that you can go by. I mean, people will do whatever they're willing to do, right? So this becomes an awful lot around nudging. And nudging is just for nudging people to buy your sneakers. It works in every single context, right? So I think our thinking is a lot that we got to find that balance between being leading edge on some areas and bleeding edge. Sometimes it's okay to be bleeding edge, but you can't be bleeding edge all the time on everything.
Thanks, Mikhail. I appreciate that answer. And Ilaria, I've got a different question for you, but can we just touch on that for 2 secs in terms of customers driving change and what you're seeing?
You mean customers of Grab and how they drive change?
Yeah, if you've got that to relate to.
Yeah, I mean, customers, they're everything to a company like us. I mean, we were founded 8 years ago. by our two founders, Anthony and Huiling Tan, when they were Harvard Business School classmates, taking a class together called Life at the Bottom of a Pyramid. And that was born out of their desire to create a business that brings safety to Malaysian transport taxi industry, where at that time it was rated one of the most dangerous in the world. And literally that's how the company started. It kind of brought the Uber model of ride hailing to Malaysia, created an accountability system through tech and real life tracking. And later on it expanded into becoming a company that doesn't just do ride hailing in 8 countries, but also into fintech, because we realized 2-3 years ago that a lot of our drivers work really hard, but they don't save money because of the system and loan sharks and all these unbanked people. 70% of Southeast Asia is unbanked. And how do you do it? And so then we created products that cater to the needs so that they could take loans, they could buy a second motorcycle, they could finally make enough money because of that to put a down payment to buy a house where they can have sustainable lives. And then of course the delivery work that we do is to empower small business merchants. So our food delivery now and also logistics, last mile, they're all to empower small food stall owners and a lot of the merchants who want to use our platform for marketplace. So yes, I mean, to answer your question, it is the needs of a lot of the people who are underbanked and underserved, and we respond to the cry by creating products that could create scalable economic opportunities.
Look, and thank you for that. I think it's an interesting thing about developing those products, as you said, to meet some of those needs. From a broader holistic perspective. And so if we jump back to the question and ask about an example, your organization is transforming its core business to address sustainability, and how are you measuring that?
So I would tweak it a little, because I think because Grab was founded on a thesis to solve the pain point of safety and later expanded into other essential verticals, such as, like I mentioned, fintech and etc. It's not really transforming the core business, but actually expanding and pivoting as well. So I'll just give some like unusual example, because, you know, the fintech story is, you know, you guys can figure it out. But I think, for example, disability inclusion, I think a lot of people feel like mobility has no place for people with disability to participate. We ended up onboarding more than 1,100 disabled people, whether they are deaf or whether they have cerebral palsy, whether they have other motor disability. If we can find a way to fit them, to include them, fully include them into the workforce, we will do it. And we ended up configuring our app so that, for example, if you are deaf, we would disable the calling function to ensure a more seamless experience, so that when passengers in Singapore get into the vehicle of a deaf person, immediately they can text, they can be notified, they have expectations. And some of our deaf drivers are actually the top rated drivers, because they're so attentive and they have such great ethics, and they appreciate their job so much. We have to work with people in, for example, who have cerebral palsy, who want to be on delivery. They have to have the right wheelchair, the right infrastructure. It takes us time, it costs us effort, and we definitely have to partner with nonprofits and government. But that is our responsibility, and we don't mind the extra effort. And those are areas where I would say we tweak and pivot and expand the way we do traditional business to ensure there's full inclusion and we're actually doing what we claim we want to be doing. So I think disability inclusion would be a very notable example that I can see with my own eyes.
That's a great example. And I like the concept that you were talking about changing the traditional business model. I think there's a lot more, not necessarily in Grabs, but in other businesses, that we can look at very different ways of operating going forward. Thanks for that. And so, Rajiv, at the end of the day, we've talked about a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, it's a leadership issue, isn't it? What do you think needs to happen from a leadership perspective to make stewardship go mainstream?
Sure, thanks, Michelle. But let me come back to your question first about the customer very briefly. I think it's very clear today that the customer is demanding the right behavior off of companies. We have Ilaria here from Grab with us, but go back to Uber. Okay, we all know what happened to in the US when the bad behavior of Uber came to light. And when people had a choice, they would use Lyft, they would use other, and there was a dump Uber app that was started, and there was a whole lot of anti-Uber. That's what the customer is forcing us all to look at, and we can't ignore that. And I think Mikhail also said, look at it for yourself. I think what we're saying is, for your own survivability and thrivability, you have to look at it from the customer. Today's customer will not buy from an organization that doesn't do good and doesn't do right while making money. We don't have any problem you making money, but do it by making the world a better place. That's the challenge that everybody needs to rise to. How do you do that? How do you create that kind of culture in your organization? I think this is where stewardship comes in. You literally have to create what we are calling the steward leadership advantage, or the stewardship advantage. And just allow me 2 minutes to just, in a very brief nutshell, explain if a company or an organization wants to get good at stewardship so that they can focus on sustainability, environment, social and governance, etc. They need to do this, build this foundation first. Now, how do you create that advantage? How do you create that culture? Every organization has an existing set of values, right? And we are saying, whether you do it from the customer's point of view or from your own thrivability point of view, or because you want to save the future of your children and grandchildren, you need to include 4 stewardship values in your overall company or corporate or organizational values. Which ones are those? It is these 4. Interdependence, belief that my success as an organization depends on other people and other beings in the universe. If you don't believe in interdependence, you don't believe in stewardship, period. Long-term view. You have to take a longer-term view at value creation and wealth creation. Otherwise, short-term temptations are there aplenty. The third is ownership mentality. If it's to be, it's up to me. Why are we saying include these values in your overall set of values? Because culture is about whether your people live those values or not. And the fourth one is creative resilience. If you take this path, because the challenges that planet Earth is facing are not trivial, and there are going to be difficulties, and we need to learn as an organization and as individuals to be more resilient, to be more innovative, and not give up. So the first step is to integrate these 4 core stewardship values within your organization's values, or if you want to become an individual steward leader, within your own personal values. Second step is, now that you have these values, based on these values, create a stewardship purpose for the organization. And what is the difference between a stewardship purpose and a regular purpose? Because every organization is a purpose-driven organization, so is the mafia. A stewardship purpose is different from any other purpose in 2 ways. One, it is based on these 4 stewardship values, and B, it is a purpose bigger than just shareholder wealth. Everything that we've been talking about. And finally, in order to make sure that when the rubber hits the road, we do the right thing each time. It's nice to have posters on the wall, but when the rubber hits the road, will each employee do the right thing? That's the hardest part, which is the final piece, which is together these values and purpose form the core compass of your organization. Now, make sure that everything the organization does is governed by and aligned to this core compass of your organization. How do you do that? Align your internal processes to that. How do you recruit? How do you pay? How do you reward? How do you do performance management? All of that needs to be guided by the stewardship core compass. That's how you start activating this and making it happen and making it part of the fabric of the organization. And the final point I'll say is this: leaders today have to be autocratic about doing this. Just putting some posters and asking people to be good is not going to make it happen. You've got to be autocratic about making sure the stewardship core compass becomes a way of life in the organization, whether people like it or not, because we have very little time left, and consensus building will take a lifetime. So that's what I would suggest in terms of, from a leadership and governance perspective, a simple framework, if you will, to activate stewardship and therefore sustainability and everything else within the organization. Comments, thoughts, questions from any one of you And do you agree? Do you disagree with anything I said so far on the methodology, if you will?
I love the word autocratic because obviously it's designed to create a response, and people usually associate negativity with it. But I agree with you. I think the tricky and complicated thing is, let me use another word, dictator. I think the world desperately needs, so many countries right now are blowing up in flames because it's a mess. Nobody has real leadership, and the people who are making noise don't really want to lead for the interests of the people. I think Singapore's founding father, Lee Kuan Yew, is a very famous example of a benevolent dictator. He was a dictator in many ways, and he was autocratic, but he had the best interests of Singapore at heart. So even when people disagree with him, he knew what he was doing and he could get things done just like that. Whereas I think a lot of countries don't. Unfortunately, though, I think the tricky part about what you just proposed, Rajiv, is that we can only trust autocratic leaders if they truly care about your interests. If they're the Abraham Lincolns of the world, or with the hearts of Mother Teresa, you know, and a lot of leaders don't do that. When they have that power, they end up abusing it. And so in that sense, maybe a more democratic and chaotic system that has more barriers is safer, because not one person will end up making all the decisions. And as a public, as a collective public, how do we have the wisdom to elect the right benevolent dictator to lead? I think that is a question for everybody, which there is no easy pat answer.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you picked up on the word autocratic, because I'm sure when I used it, and I'm sure afterwards when you agreed with it, a lot of people on this webinar are cringing. What are these guys talking about? But you know what? We ran probably the largest study of its kind in the world. We asked people, thousands of people in 28 countries, that in today's high-speed world, where so much is at stake, what kind of leadership is needed? Democratic inclusion or autocratic? And guess what? Our global database, 75% of the global database agreed that we need autocratic top-down leadership. So it's not just you and me talking, people agree. The lowest country, the lowest level of disagreement was 51%, which was, I think, Denmark, and the highest was 96%. I can't remember which country, but 75% agreed or strongly agreed. So it is the need of the hour. The other question that you raised is this, that, you know, what if they start abusing power? And you used a fantastic example to illustrate the earlier point, which is Lee Kuan Yew. Here's what the magic of Lee Kuan Yew, if I may, and I'm in Singapore today, so I can, I'm still learning, I'm no expert, but is this. He was autocratic, but he was only autocratic about two things. And he was totally benevolent about everything else. What were those two things? A stewardship purpose. He gave the country a stewardship purpose. So there's state stewardship, and he's a shining example of that. And what you see around in Singapore is a great example of what happened. And about the values. So autocratic about values and purpose, and freedom within the framework on everything else. That's what positive autocracy is all about. And as long as you remember that, then you don't cross the line towards absolute dictatorship. So anyway, thanks for bringing that up. Michelle, your thoughts?
I'd actually like to jump to Mikhail on this one, if it's okay, Rajiv. We're just running really short on time. Sorry about it. Yeah.
Right, so Michelle, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Yep, I'm liking to jump straight to Mikhail, because then there's so many wonderful questions that I'd like to give them. So I give up my spot.
Okay.
Some of the questions.
There's no need to do this, because I don't think I will speculate too much in terms of the philosophy of whether we need dictators or not. I think I'm just going to come back to the hard-nosed reality and ask the question, who are we? Where is the stewardship level? Because I think we could all agree that the world would be better if everybody was thinking like that. And by the way, if everybody have enough money to be allowed to think like that, right? It's when you are in a certain position in life and you met your Maslow of needs, these things are things that comes to mind. And they're certainly good things to have. And I truly believe in them personally. I don't expect, though, that everybody necessarily can live by these principles. So I come back to the tricky part of this, which is, if I'm the CEO, am I the one who has to be the benevolent dictator? well, then I need to be empowered by my board. If I'm the board, are we meant to be the benevolent one? Well, I need to be empowered by the shareholders. If we're the shareholders, are we the ones? Well, we have our own shareholders, and so it goes. So I think I will answer your question with the question is, who are the we in the stewards here? Who are the stewards that needs to have this mindset?
All of us.
Well, yes, of course, but also if you're saving for your kids and you have a very, very small saving, would you invest in the company who provides a slightly lower return because it provides good stewardship, not stewardship in terms of governance, but to have these thoughts? And let's for a second imagine that this is not one of those lucky companies where there is no trade-off between doing good and doing well.
Mm-hmm.
Would
yeah,
you?
Again, our research is showing us that the millennials and beyond absolutely would invest would settle with a lesser return as long as, in fact, they won't invest in a company that is not doing good and doing right. So I think there's hope for all of us. Michelle, I think you are waiting to open this up to the floor, so I'm going to give it back to you.
Thanks, Rajiv. And yes, the sooner millennials get a greater share of the wallet to spend, I think we'll start to see some real change. So I do agree with you on that one. Look, we've got so many wonderful questions from the floor, and hence why I was wanting to give up my slot. Not that I didn't want to offer comment. Those of you who know me know that I'm usually willing to jump right in. But I wanted to tackle a couple of the really interesting questions that have come through. One that came through before the session, and so I'm going to go to that first off. Rajiv, it's kind of got your name on it. How will SAC drive greater sustainable allocation of capital and investment stewardship in Asia?
Well, I would go to DBS Bank. No, I'm just kidding. Mikhail will take care of you. No, just kidding, just kidding. Well, Stewardship Asia's mandate is to create awareness and build capability around stewardship and steward leadership. And I don't think we can play a direct role in directing capital. I think what we can do is raise awareness so that more capital flows. That's all I can say on that.
Thank you for that. Look, there's another, it's a very long question, but I think it's pretty, given you were liking provocative statements earlier, and all of you seem to be keen on this, I'm going to read it out. The gist of it leads back to some of those comments that we had earlier about whose view are you taking on sustainability, a first world perspective, or one where I'm barely able to make sure that I have food in my children's mouths. So the question from Paul Maher is, whose standard do we go with in deciding what is sustainable and defining what we mean by sustainability? And he gives a couple of examples about Bangladeshi factories. Sorry, 1 minute, just lost that. Bangladesh factories, talking about garment making and shoes, and the usual experiences that we've had, and the drive that those companies have to make the companies produce at the lowest possible cost. And so they comply, they may lay off child workers, and then what happens then if they can't find alternate employment? And let's just say employment is not perhaps as easy using conventional methods, whether that be slavery or prostitution. And so the question, I guess, is how do we go back to that? What's sustainability? Is it for somebody who's at that bottom tier, or for somebody in the first world? So please feel free to jump in, guys. Tough question.
So maybe I can start with that, because I feel that I've kind of started to wrongly represent all that is wrong with this world. And I do this not because I believe in it, because I think it's important that we have this debate, because these are not easy questions. So I hope nobody comes away from this thinking that that I don't believe in the stewardship model that was just presented. Now, I want to say that this is why I started my conversation with this about finding the balance. So the way that we in DPS think about it, and certainly the most inspiring bit that ever came to me, was this thing that came out around the donut economics, or that those of you who are not familiar with it, it is essentially saying that there are minimum thresholds that you need to give people: a right to live for more than $1.95, minimum access to water, and so on. And then there's 9 planetary boundaries that we must not breach. I'm bringing this concept up because to answer the question that was given, every country is different. And I think it is fair, although it is controversial, that you do not treat a country in the third world the same way as you, and you don't have the same expectations as you do for one in the first world. And I think when you start to look at these graphs for each country and see how different they are, you got to believe the response is also different. So when you're asking me who's setting these, I think it has to be set in a local context. Now, that's my first part of my answer. My second part of my answer is, I do think that it is reasonable for companies or anybody in the first world to set minimum standards for third world countries. Considerate one, and understanding that they might not be the ones that you would want to live under, but still a minimum bar must be accepted, must be applied. Not everything goes, but, and this is my third part of my answer, is it helps an awful lot if it comes with an incentive. It is much easier to say, I don't accept, but I don't give you any reasons to change because I'm not willing to pay more. If it comes with, listen, dear company, if you change these things, we will guarantee you a higher premium for your products in our supply chain, then things become real. Yeah. So just to summarize, I think it has to be local context. I think there are minimum standards in this world that we shouldn't drop below, even if we are sitting far away from where the problems really arise. But I think it's a lot more genuine if it comes with also a token of gratitude when people actually change.
I might just quickly add a very short answer. Someone told me, and I forgot who, but really well said, beware of people who try to give you very simple answers to very complicated problems. This question here suggests a very complicated, multi-webbed, multi-pronged problem, because it's this chain of demand, right? Like, why does child trafficking exist in certain countries? Because there's a demand for it. There's people who fly in to do sex tourism, so hence it creates a demand. So there's always this market for trafficking. If some child gets laid off from a factory, then they'll fall into that. I would very quickly say, I think there's a huge importance for public-private sector partnership, because private sector, by design, our DNA is to innovate, is to scale, is to find profitable ways and interesting ways to grow a product, is to create that part. And yet people need safety nets when things don't work out, because every human being has a line of good and evil in us. We do good stuff, we do selfish stuff, and every day we wake up, it starts all over again. And why we need governments is because when things don't work out, because we're all imperfect, there is a social safety net, especially for the vulnerable, especially for the ones who cannot afford food. And so this public-private partnership needs to be so active and so vigilant that when those private sector cases fail, there is a way for these people to afford food so they don't have to sell their kids to traffickers. And also, for example, when these factories end up, for example, this example, if Nike or Ralph Lauren end up, stop buying from this factory, can this factory work with the government to say, actually, what are other industries that, what are other things we could produce that could also be useful, worthwhile for the economy, that these children or these adults can be employed instead of children? There should be many ways to do many solutions to a possible problem, and people need to work together. And I feel like that is what is sometimes missing, really.
Yeah, look, I think you bring up a really valid point, Ilaria, about simple answers. By the same token, a lack of tolerance for unacceptable behavior, it kind of comes back to that minimum level. Yeah. So so I agree with you that sometimes things, they're not simple, right? Otherwise we wouldn't be in this situation. But actually sometimes we do need to also try to just get rid of the noise and get rid of the what ifs, and because otherwise we're still going to be clouded by some of those things coming through. So I think some really great points that you were making in there. Can I take that, because you brought up private-public partnerships, which is a really good thing for us to spin off. Rajiv, how do you see public-private partnerships evolving to address some of the things that we've been talking about today?
Well, I don't think we have any other choice but to partner at every level. And connectivity today allows us to do that. So neither the state nor the private sector has all the answers, but the great connector is connectivity. What do I mean by that? I think, I know several governments and several government agencies are now actively crowdsourcing solutions from the private sector. And similarly, if the private sector wants to do something, if a particular company wants to do something, they can crowdsource as well. And joining this tripartite state, private sector, and the population at large is, I think, the way to go. Today, innovation and talent is not scarce, and that's the opportunity. Technology allows us to tap into it, and tripartism is one way of doing that. So I'm an optimist.
I think we all are, Rajiv. Ilaria, there was a question asked by Paul Fong that I wanted to pass the baton to you on. And he asks, and Paul's from, I'm guessing this is Paul from Dow, would companies consider making less profit if this would help to promote sustainability? I.e., would DBS and Grab reduce its profit margin and adopt higher cost of business model, but one that promotes sustainability?
I guess the quick answer is yes, but I think this term less profit could come in many forms, right? So I think, for example, if you invest companies' resources, time, and your human capital to make certain sustainability goals and effort happen, essentially you are putting in, you're investing more into making that happen. Hence, it comes from your bottom line. So for example, I have mentioned about investing into helping the disabled community for sure. For example, if you employ a perfectly healthy person to deliver food, they can deliver in 30 minutes. Whereas if you employ someone who is on a wheelchair, maybe it'll take 45 to 50 minutes. That may affect your rating. That may have less orders per hour. That means less profit, but do we still uplift and include these people? Absolutely. And so the answer is yes. I think there are some decisions that needs to be made. For example, I remember from very early days, we look at how well drivers get paid. Are they getting paid above average? Are they getting paid better than a normal taxi driver? How do we incentivize them when they work harder so they get paid well? So that's one part of the ride-hailing business, that we make sure that people are earning properly. But the other part too is, for example, training, right? Digital literacy. We, for example, have a digital literacy program, which more than 500,000, I think, drivers employed on our platform as gig workers have gone through, so that they could upskill themselves. So they can be better at entrepreneurial skills and digital skills, so that if they want to start their own business or move into a job that may pay more, they may be well equipped enough to do that. Now, does that directly help Grab's profit by doing that? Probably not, because in some ways we're kind of like encouraging some of our own drivers to maybe like leave and do something else. But is it good for them? Yes. Are we able to provide this kind of digital literacy training? Yes. So is that the right thing to do? Absolutely. So I think there are so many ways to do this, to be able to be a company that doesn't just think about your profit and are willing to make investment, and whether even when it costs you, even when you have to put extra effort and resources, and that is really the right thing to do.
Some great examples through there, Ilaria. Thanks for getting really specific. It makes it easy for us to understand how you do that trade-off. And so, Mikhail, you mentioned trade-off earlier, and so let's go back to that. How much is okay to trade off, and how do you do that? And are there certain metrics, or how do you do that decisioning? To the question.
Yeah, that's a very deep question. I don't think there is such an answer to how much is okay to trade off. I think if you wanted to do this to the nth degree, you get into this horribly complex thing that's called impact measurement. It's worth mentioning the concept without going into all the detail though, because what it essentially does, it recognizes that we have at least 3 Ps, right? The people, the planet, and the profit. And profit here, I will substitute by prosperity. So when you look at creating any product, you will have to realize that it creates some usability. It makes your and my life easier if we have a car. Not that I ever owned one. but I also know that it is a strain on nature. And I hopefully in the process have employed some people, and hopefully not too many who is paid below the living wage. So what impact measurement tried to do is to try to quantify all these things. And we've done some work in DPS, complicated as it is, to try and understand what does it mean for us when we lend money to certain sectors. Now, ultimately, that is what is required of us, a full understanding of what are the positive externalities that I generate and the negative externalities. And if you allow me just to add 2 seconds here, there was an amazing study done by a company called TrueCost, I don't know, 2013 maybe, where they looked at if you priced in all the externalities of 20 of the biggest sectors in the world, they would be net negative contributing to the world as a whole when you took all these things in. Now, that tells you something. It doesn't tell you that the company should stop because they may not be pricing these things in. But I think that's the level that we want to get to. And then the answer becomes superfluous around how much of a trade-off is there, because you're essentially looking at what is the positive and the negative. And although principally you shouldn't be netting them off, at least you get a sense. And then you can work to reduce the negative while recognizing that overall this product is good for the world. But it is not an easy exercise, and it is not something that people will get to on day one. So we got to work with proxies in getting there, but the thinking needs to be there. The thinking needs to be that I take ownership for what happens to my product from it starts its life somewhere far, far away, where the rubber from my tires in my car company starts, and all the way through to that gets recycled and into finishes its life somewhere, gets recycled as materials. When I have that, I've gotten really far.
Thanks, Mikhail. I think there's another question here, which, sorry, it's coming your way as well. And it's from Manib. Do we need autocratic regulators to impose stewardship and sustainability codes on us?
Oh, that's a tough one today.
Do you really want to answer that one? Huh?
I should caveat this by saying in this response, and probably in most of my response, I don't represent DBS. This is my own personal view. I used to think that we should let markets self-regulate. I've come to appreciate that I don't think we have the time for it. So the answer to that question is yes. You can then ask me the question of at what level does that governance happen and that tyrant exist. Here you would want it to happen as high a level as possible, because we can't solve these problems in individuals, and there's not enough incentive for countries to do these things. However, I recommend highly that whoever asks this question read the book, The Sustainable State. For me, that is the best example of how this could work. And it advocates that the only power lies at a state level. Going higher than that, you don't really can ever get consensus. And going lower than that, you don't have the power to influence this. I highly recommend this book.
Thanks, Mikhail. Larry, I'm not sure if you have a view on the concept of regulation and whether we should have more enforcement to actually get more companies. There's obviously a lot of leaders out there that are championing and doing the right things, but there are a lot who are very slow and are not jumping in and making the change, and therefore the weight on what the others are having to bear is quite heavy. Do you have a perspective on that?
I believe in accountability, whether it's in the form of a regulator or a board or whatever it is. I believe human beings, we all need to have checks and balances. But the key here is who are the people who are elected or selected to be these regulators or accountability people, and are they educated on the field? I think one of the problems that we see is, for example, we've seen the US big tech guys being called to court basically very recently. And yes, some of the politicians who are regulating them, they don't understand the tech industry. One guy even confused Facebook with Twitter. So in that case, you don't even have the right people who study enough the subject to understand, hence regulate properly. And I think that requires, again, very careful selection of the right leaders that have the knowledge as well as the heart, so that when they are keeping people in tabs. They're doing it not to attack, not politically motivated, but for the interest of the industry. So again, a complicated answer to a question, really. It's complex. Let's not say complicated, it's complex. Yeah.
Can I jump in here real quick on this one? I believe that regulation alone is not going to change behavior. What happens when we over-rely on regulation is that it becomes a check-the-box exercise. And hence, there's two ways to change behavior. One is inorganic, that is through regulation. We need that. We certainly need that, but over-regulating is not going to be the answer, and relying only on regulation is not going to be the answer. Organic behavior change needs to happen, and that's kind of where I was going with the fact that CEOs and boards need to activate that stewardship core compass. Values-based governance, according to our research, produces much long-lasting behavior change than compliance and rules-based governance. So I think we should keep that in mind as well. Both have a role to play. If anything, my bias is that values-based governance goes longer in changing behavior and deeper.
Yeah, I'm partially in agreement with you on that one, Rajiv, partially not. When it comes to the scale and change that we have to, I just think the scale of change and the timeliness of that change is causing us to question. I agree, better behavioral change will come through adoption, but there's one last question. There's many questions that I can't get to today, unfortunately. There's one that says the 2019 statement by some top US CEOs have committed themselves not merely shareholders to stakeholdership. This is appropriate stewardship. But Richard's saying, I have not seen a corresponding statement by your companies. Are there impediments to do so? So I'm guessing that is targeted more so at the companies. But Rajiv, you might want to kick us off.
No,
to have a view on this.
I thought this question was more for Grab and DPS, isn't it? So
it's just it touches on stewardship so much that I thought you might have a view. But let me, giving a bit of time for Ilaria and Mikhail to come on board to look at this one.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think you're referring to the CEO roundtable in the US. So from that perspective, we're off the hook. We're not a US-based company. I think you should look to the fact that we're a member of the World Business Council, who itself just came up with commitments which are pretty tough to meet. So I encourage you to look at their latest criteria for members, and we're in fact on the EXCO on that. So I'm not sad that we haven't made a sufficient commitment. I'm actually pretty proud of what we've done there. If you talk about the impediments, I think there's some real ones. And please take this as an observation rather than any statement of blame to anybody or getting out of jail. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing is companies making big statements around commitments to be carbon neutral in 2050. Now, that's pretty hard because it's really hard to make plans for 2050. It's even harder when you're a bank because your impact is as a second order derivative. So I think in terms of making concrete plans, you got to be focusing on trying to keep your long-term vision in mind, but it's not so easy to make a 2050 commitment, but what you can do is probably make shorter-term commitments. So that's as far as I'll go.
Thanks, Mikhail. Oh, sorry, Larry.
No, it's okay. I actually don't have too much to say about this because I can't represent our company on this matter. But I do think that there is a level of maturity probably for some of these companies, whether they're all public or not, or whether they have enough of a critical mass, right? Whether it's shareholders or employees or other people that they have committed to stakeholdership. I think that's why for tech companies, I can only speak for tech companies, when you're still private, when you're still in startup mode, when you're still growing and evolving very quickly, you tend to stay private so that you can move in a very nimble way, right? But once you want to reach a certain scale or you actually commit to going IPO, then you are going to be accountable to more people. And maybe that this conversation should be had when the company is at that stage, because because you have that scale. Yeah,
that's great. Look, there are many questions, including a couple that I wanted to ask you guys, so you better watch out, Mikhail and Rajiv and Larry. I'm looking you up afterwards. But I think we didn't get near the audacious goal concept. Mikhail brought up about net zero, and some of those goals are absolutely, and there's a role for audacious goals without knowing all the answers of exactly how we're going to get there. And I think there's another big question that we didn't get to today about the difference between what used to be at one end around philanthropy and what used to be the other end of pure capitalism, and the fact that actually those things are coming more and more together, and that it is actually okay to make money by doing good. But in the interest of time, Rajiv, we're back to you to try and do a summary on the amount of things that we covered in that session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Actually, we had some help when it came to doing the summary. And if I may ask my team to share the doodle that the artist just created, just listening to our, look at that. This is what we've been talking about all this while now. Isn't this amazing how these people can do this amazing art just by listening to a conversation? So I think in summary, we've covered a whole lot of points in terms of, what it is, why it is. I'd like to just invite all of us to think about, everybody on the call, as well as my co-panelists, to think about, okay, we've talked about stewardship, we've talked about sustainability, we've talked about governance and everything. And yes, it's important to do. We've seen all the reasons why it is. It's on your screen in front of you. But what are we each going to do in order to create a small legacy? What are we each going to do in the next week, in the next month, in the next year to make our own little difference? I'll start by making a commitment as to what I will do over the next year. I am not happy to hear this point all the time about the fact that it's either stewardship or it's profit. It's either sustainability or it's profit. So I am committing, and along with my teammates at Stewardship Asia, we're committing that we will do everything we can in the next year and beyond to remove that confusion. In fact, we will convince people through our programs, through our books, through our films, through our videos, through our articles, that if you want to make money, if you want to make a profit, the only way to do that is to take care of people and planet as well, because otherwise today's markets will reject you. So that's what we are going to be maniacally focused on for the year. Michelle, what are you going to be maniacally focused on over the next month or next year?
Myself? Too many things. Too many things. But I think for me, my background is around transformation and bringing change about in organizations. And what I'm trying to do is get a better leverage, a better understanding of how I use the right lever of communication to help bring technology and innovation and change around sustainability together, especially for startups. I think they're a really great group that we don't actually go about creating some of the problems that large corporates have to retrofit. And so for me, I think I want to try and bring that conversation to some startups that I started over the last couple of weeks and want to do more on. Thanks.
Fantastic. And if I may invite first Ilaria and then Mikhail to also share a final thought as to what are you going to be focused on over the next week, month, or year?
For me, I wear quite a few different hats, and I think, the continuation of that is important. Aside from working with Grab on their diplomacy, thought leadership, social impact, the humanitarian organizations that I serve, they pretty much focus on issues like orphan trafficking, et cetera, in Asia. That really represents the charity sector. But I also really believe in investments, especially in the venture capital space because of my background. And so I think my time really is very much dedicated to building bridges in all of these fields, in humanitarian field, in investment field, and in helping a big tech company form diplomacy. And I think the world desperately needs bridge builders, especially right now, the East and West. There's just so many geopolitical conflicts, and I hope to, in my small way, be able to build bridges in those arenas.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Mikhail.
Yeah, so for me, I'll say something a little bit more back to basic. It starts with myself, and it always kind of does. So I've set myself, some of you know, 17 SDGs for myself, but I try to make progress in different areas of my life. So I'm vegan and all these things. So for next year, there's really two things I'm going to be trying to do to push the envelope a little bit further. One is I'm going to try and see if I can get below 4 tons of carbon of emission each year. It's harder than it sounds when most people are much higher than that. So that will make some further lifestyle changes in my life. And then secondly, what I done is we spend a lot of time in our heads. I want to spend more time using my hands. And so I've signed up to a really cool, and I encourage every one of you to do this, community project that happens up in Tampines around lava worms. So what this basically means is whatever garbage you could possibly imagine in this world, these guys will eat it. And then they become a source of food for fish that if you're not vegan like me, you can then eat. It really makes a big difference when you can sometimes be using your hands, not just your head. And although worms may not attract everybody, there are many other good causes, social or environmental, that you can do here in Singapore.
Thank you. On that note, I'd like to urge everybody on this call to think, because every single action of all of us is going to take collectively to secure the future of our children and our grandchildren. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank our panelists for contributing their valuable thoughts and time, and urge everybody to please don't worry about how small the step might be, but if I could urge you to think about what's the one thing that I can do to make a difference, because this is our planet, this is our world, and this is our collective responsibility. So thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, thanks very much. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much, everybody.